The War of 1996 represented the culmination of decades of research carried out by the Harvesters on the human species and culminated in the realization by humanity that we are not alone in the universe. The War of 1996 was the global struggle between humanity and the Harvesters for the very fate of the planet, and while the War of 1996 was fought across the globe, we will be focusing today on the battles fought in the United States, as they are the ones we have the most intelligence on. The prelude to the War of 1996 began as the large Harvester mothership settled into low Earth orbit, baffling both government officials and scientific professionals alike. And on the morning of July 2nd, 36 city-sized spacecraft, known as city destroyers, detached from the underside of the mothership and began entering Earth's atmosphere. The first confirmed city destroyer to be sighted by humans on the ground was a city destroyer flying over northern Iraq. A second one would appear shortly thereafter over central Russia, making its way towards Moscow, and a third one would quickly be picked up by US forces over the Persian Gulf, also advancing northward towards the Middle East. The first one sighted in the vicinity of North America, however, was off the west coast of the United States, making its way towards Los Angeles. This is the first one that the humans tried to make contact with, as a single AWACS aircraft was flown into the oncoming city destroyer, ultimately destroying the AWACS plane. Shortly after that incident, another pair of city destroyers were detected off the East Coast, one heading for New York and one heading for Washington, D.C. In response to this, the U.S. government activated the emergency broadcast system, which alerted citizens across the United States of the incoming event. Shortly thereafter, the White House carried out a press conference where they informed the U.S. public of the ongoing incident. Shortly after the White House address, however, the first of these city destroyers arrived over the major cities of the world, with them settling over 36 different cities around the globe, positioning themselves over the center of these metropolitan hubs. In the first wave of city destroyers, 3 were over the United States, with 1 over Washington, D.C., 1 over New York, and 1 over Los Angeles. In the surrounding areas, there was also 1 over Toronto in Canada, 1 over Vancouver in Canada, 1 over Mexico City in Mexico, and 1 over Havana, Cuba. On top of that, there were city destroyers around the globe, in cities in Europe like Paris and London, and cities in Asia like Beijing. Humanity's objectives in the coming war, although they didn't know the war was coming yet, would simply be to survive the Harvester attacks, and eventually to repel the Harvester forces from their planet. On the other hand, the Harvesters sought to wipe out humanity and begin terraforming and harvesting the natural resources from Earth to fuel their empire. Shortly before the coordinated Harvester attack carried out across the globe, the humans made one more attempt to communicate with the alien visitors, flying a series of helicopters around the city destroyer that had been located over Washington, D.C. However, this welcome wagon expedition was met with violence, and it became clear that the aliens' intentions were hostile roughly 30 minutes before their coordinated attack. With the destruction of the welcome wagon expedition, an evacuation order was given for all major metropolitan areas underneath these spacecraft. This included Washington, D.C., New York City, and Los Angeles. However, these evacuations were ultimately ineffective, and there was not nearly enough time before the first wave of Harvester attacks was commenced. These attacks were devastating. Coordinated globally, they managed to destroy all 36 cities that found themselves under these city destroyers. Luckily for the U.S. government, most U.S. leadership was able to evacuate Washington, D.C. before the attack. However, a significant portion of the civilian population was unable to evacuate. In the aftermath of this attack, and when it became clear that there would be follow-up attacks on other cities, the order was given nationally for citizens to evacuate all major population centers. Thus began the mass exodus from these cities. As the sun rose on the morning of July 3rd, a counterattack was carried out across the United States and realistically across the world, as the militaries of human governments scrambled to engage the alien invaders. Coordinating these attacks from Air Force One, President Whitmore witnessed firsthand as U.S. forces were decimated over Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, D.C. by alien light strike craft known as attackers. In response to these strikes, the aliens launched a series of counterattacks, first against the bases that had launched the attacks earlier in the morning of July 3rd. These are bases like El Toro in California. And then a follow-up series of attacks targeting mainly military command and control centers like NORAD. With the first wave of cities destroyed, the city destroyers began making their way towards their second targets. The New York destroyer made its way towards Philadelphia, the Washington, D.C. destroyer made its way towards Atlanta, the Los Angeles destroyer made its way towards Colorado Springs, the Toronto destroyer made its way towards Chicago, the Vancouver destroyer approached Seattle, the Mexico City destroyer entered the airspace over Guadalajara, and the Havana destroyer made its way towards Miami. About midday on July 3rd, the second round of cities was attacked, with the total destruction of Philadelphia, Atlanta, Colorado Springs, Chicago, Seattle, Guadalajara, and Miami, as well as countless other cities across the globe. With the second wave of cities destroyed, they began making their way towards their third targets, while human governments began amassing for another counterattack. In the United States, this took the form of a planned nuclear strike, which, well debated, was ultimately decided on after a botched autopsy showed the president the aliens' intentions. And while city destroyers all around the world began approaching their third sets of targets, the United States launched flights of nuclear-armed bombers to engage these city destroyers. Over the United States, the third wave cities included Pittsburgh, Houston, Phoenix, Detroit, San Francisco, and Boston, with another destroyer over Monterrey, Mexico. Nuclear-armed bombers from the U.S. Air Force were dispatched to all 6 destroyers over U.S. airspace at this time, with the first one to reach its target being the bombers over Houston. Firing a single missile with a thermonuclear warhead against the hovering alien spacecraft, it was detonated against the ship's shields, and while briefly it appeared that the spacecraft had been destroyed, this assault ultimately ended up being a failure as the spacecraft remained intact. That evening, the third wave cities of Pittsburgh, Houston, Phoenix, Detroit, San Francisco, Monterey, and Boston were all destroyed. However, it was in the overnight hours in between July 3rd and July 4th that a counterattack was mustered globally with an interesting plan. A captured alien attacker, which had crashed in New Mexico in 1947, would be flown up to the alien mothership and used to compromise the aliens' electronic systems, hopefully bringing down their shields and allowing a coordinated strike to hit them when their shields are down. In the wee hours of July 4th, this attacker was launched from Area 51 in Nevada and made its way up to the alien mothership. Meanwhile, the city destroyers neared their fourth wave targets, those being the cities of Cleveland, Dallas, Las Vegas, St. Louis, El Paso, Montreal, as well as the airbase at Groom Lake known as Area 51. As the captured alien attacker docked with the alien mothership, waves of fighters were launched from airbases across the world to carry out assaults against the alien city destroyers. Meanwhile, on the mothership, the first ground forces were being prepared for a land invasion that was going to be targeted at the shattered remains of humanity. The final air battles of the conflict culminated across the globe over the cities of the fourth wave strikes, with the Allied air forces engaging alien spacecraft shortly after their shields had been dropped by a virus deployed directly to the mothership. And after much fighting, it was discovered that strikes directly to the primary weapon of the city destroyers could bring the entire vessel down, which ultimately was communicated to strike squadrons across the globe, and as a result, the city destroyers were brought down across the planet. Meanwhile, in orbit, a tactical nuclear weapon was detonated inside the Harvester mothership, destroying it and leaving its debris raining into Earth's atmosphere. Ultimately, the defeat of the aliens was a triumph for humanity and the end of a very short but very bloody war. Ultimately, while the conflict ended in a human victory, it was a costly one, with over 3 billion humans perishing in the conflict, albeit with the Harvesters having lost their entire invasion force. Well, this was a much broader look at the War of 1996. If you'd like to take a closer look at one of the more finite battles of the conflict, I'll leave a link in the upper right-hand corner to my battle analysis on the Battle of Los Angeles, which was part of the July 3rd counterattacks. And if you have any other battles you'd like to see covered in future episodes of Battle Analysis and added to the archive, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.